So yeah, it's noon on the dot. Want to respect folks' time by getting started quickly here, although we know that sometimes folks are hopping from one meeting to the next and signing in can take a second. So we'll offer a few seconds for folks to file in. I think we troubleshot the chat feature to the point where folks can introduce themselves in the chat. And so I'd encourage you to do so if you so choose, but just really appreciative for a lot of people to be spending their lunch hour here on a Thursday speaking with us about electric utility co-ops and the importance of voting in your utility board elections. Obviously, we've got some going on currently, and so it's a timely topic. Also wanted to start with the land acknowledgement. You know, us REAP staff here, many of us live in Dena'ina lands here in Anchorage, but we work across the state, and we're just incredibly appreciative for the stewardship over many generations that Alaska Native peoples have shown to these lands, and we want to carry that forward through our work to accelerate REAP's mission of integrating renewable energy resources and energy efficiency measures across the state so that we can take their lead and try and help steward these lands into the future. So again, super appreciative and want to keep that in mind as we talk about the importance of these utility board elections and the unique opportunity we have to influence decision-making here in Alaska. And so we've got an awesome slate of speakers. Just to give a rundown of sort of what the agenda might look like. We're going to start with Anthony and then hand it off to Aurora sorry, I got to click out of that software update reminder. I'll do that later. But before we dive in with some of our board candidates here and talk about specifically the Chugach Electric Board election. But without further ado, I think Anthony might get us started with just a rundown of the utility cooperative model, how it differs from other models that we've seen, and some specifics here on the rail belt. So take it away, please, Anthony.
Thanks. So I was asked to sort of review the co-op model, like why do we have electric utility co-ops? The co-op model goes back to 1935 with passage of the Rural Electrification Act or something titled close to that under Roosevelt. There was recognition that a lot of rural areas in the country weren't being electrified, and that electric service was necessary, was a necessary part of participating in the modern economy at that time, and it still is. That's an essential element for why it is that we regulate public utilities at all. It's not just because they're monopolies, although that is a critical and incredibly important reason for why it is we regulate. But the other reason is that utilities provide essential services. So I bet it's the case that there's at most one slide rule manufacturer in this country anymore. But nobody cares, because even though they might have market power, slide rules are no longer essential. So what they found, I mean, what we were widely observing is that customers in rural parts of the country weren't being electrified. They weren't getting electric service. And that's because it just really wasn't profitable, didn't pay. It's the third reason why we regulate public utilities. It's related to their the fact that they're natural monopolies, is they're incredibly capital intensive. Electric utilities require multiples more of capital investment per unit of revenue than any other industry. It's really quite remarkable. And we see this same dynamic in rural Alaska, right? Where we don't have, for the most part, we don't have for-profit utilities serving rural Alaska. And that's because the capital investment is very large and the number of customers is very small, and you basically can't make a going concern of it. So the feds have typically subsidized the cost of debt for co-ops. And Chugach is an odd exception in that because they're not really rural anymore. But in any case, that's that's why the co-op model kind of got going. So investor-owned utilities are pretty different than co-ops. We typically, you don't have co-ops where investor-owned utilities can make a substantial profit. You just don't really see that. But then what we do with investor-owned utilities is we regulate them. We economically regulate them pretty significantly. And they cannot change rates without a regulatory commission saying that's okay. They can't change who they provide service to or how they provide service, or even when their office hours at their place of business change. They can't do any of those things really without asking. So that's true for investor-owned utilities, and it's also true for regulated co-op utilities, of which Chugach is one. Historically, typically, and certainly in this state, co-ops are lightly regulated if they're regulated at all. And the reason why is because as member-owned, if they charge too much, why, it's the members who get the benefit of that. So you really don't have the same sort of dynamic of rapacious capitalism that you otherwise need to worry about with monopoly for-profit providers of electric service. So in Alaska, we really, I mean, I'm a former regulator, but we really do lightly regulate co-ops. We tend not to have too much scrutiny over their conduct. And part of the reason is because we really can't. If a regulator thinks a co-op is screwed up, there's not much that they can do about it because there aren't investors to go after. If the co-op management is screwed up, basically, in the eyes of a regulator, basically the only person you can go after, the only other party, is the member owners, or the very people who, as a regulator, you're there to protect. So historically, we've lightly regulated, and part of the reason for that is because as member-owned cooperatives, the thought is that the board of directors, which is looking out for the members, will do what the members want. And that works pretty well if, and only if, members are involved and they're choosing, they're reasonably informed, and they're choosing directors who are setting broad policy direction, which is consistent with the kind of service that they want to see. And so that's why we at REAP believe it's so important for all of us to be very involved in these elections. The model simply doesn't work without active participation of the members to choose good directors that they believe represent them in terms of the strategic decisions that are being made. Because at the end of the day, it's very difficult for regulators to take the sort of action that you normally would be able to take with an investor-owned utility, including providing increased profit incentives for doing things like energy conservation or whatever, which is, I mean, that's an example of the kind of tool that's regularly used outside to encourage investor-owned utilities to make investments in energy conservation, that sort of thing. So I think with that, I'll stop. I'm really grateful for everybody's presence today. And I'll turn it over to Aurora.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony, and thanks everybody for being here to learn with all of us today. And I think we're going to try to make this a little bit more of a conversation too. So I'll give a little bit of a spiel about who I am and why I care about this, and then we'll jump in with some other folks and then hear from the candidates also. But So my name's Aurora, and I am, it said utility expert on the REAP advertisement, and I actually don't consider myself an expert. I'm just a nerd that has come to this issue because I really care about climate change. And so in my day job, I'm actually an earth scientist, and I study melting glaciers and have been doing that for over 10 years from Antarctica to Greenland to Alaska. And I grew up in Alaska. And so this is, something that I really care about, and really see utilities as an opportunity to lead our energy transition in order to address the climate crisis. So that's how I came to this. And then also part of this, my dad has run for the board of Chugach Electric, and I got a front row seat to what that process of trying to engage with your utility as a member and as somebody that wanted to participate in the utility, just what that process was like. And it became very clear to me that in terms of addressing the climate crisis and switching to renewable energy, that it wasn't actually a technology issue, it's a governance issue. And so I used sort of my nerdiness of being a researcher and have really delved into trying to understand rural electric cooperatives as institutions, and sort of how we ended up with this institution, as Anthony was saying, and how we engage with that as members. And so I really care about energy democracy and trying to see how we can improve our energy democracy in the Rail Belt region. To build off some things that Anthony was saying, cooperatives have this really sounding sort of progressive name, that sounds like, oh yeah, this is for the people, by the people. And that was sort of how it was sold in the 1930s, even though it was this dictated program coming down from the federal government. And I think one of the questions that I had, I was sort of like, well, if this is, really for the people, by the people, why is it that nationally, at a national level, we see cooperatives being really sort of slow to respond to change and member needs? And that's really because sort of structurally, they exist, the same way that they did in the 1930s. Not a lot has changed about how cooperatives are sort of set up and run. And now we're in a period where we need to change really fast. And that is not what this institution has historically been good at doing. And one of the other things is that, if you're going to have an institution that is based off of member participation and relies on member participation, you're also going to get the same structural inequities that exist through all of society. That's going to propagate within that same institution. And so when we think about people who have the privilege and time to actually participate as members or as board members in rural electric cooperatives, we see that largely nationally, people that participate on boards are white, even in communities of color, and they're predominantly male, and also older. And so this is just because, when you think about who has time and the know-how to want to participate in these institutions. And so something I really care about is trying to diversify who's actually paying attention to utilities and participating as their members. Let's see, some other things. And so this also relates to voter turnout as well. So not just in participation, we can look at the voter turnout numbers, and nationally, we see that voter turnout for electric boards is less than 10%. And so this is another reason why we're not seeing nationally across the board, electric cooperatives responding to member needs, is because members just aren't voting. And a lot of people don't even know that they're members. So when I first started learning about this, I think a lot of other folks on this call that care about this too have had this experience. I started just talking to people at potlucks and dinner parties about, electric co-ops and this election and Chugach Electric. And, people who I would generally think of people that participate in statewide elections or municipal elections, who are generally in the know of what's going on, had no idea that they were even a part of the system and could participate. And so I think that's one of the things that we're really trying to spread the word about and increase our voter turnout. Kauai Electric Cooperative in Hawaii has a 40% voter turnout. And this is because they really faced some challenging issues with their grid. And there was a kind of a big crisis, and members started getting engaged and wanted to learn more. And through that process over a couple of years of having to navigate challenging times, more and more people now knew about the system they were a part of and started voting. And I really see that, with what's happening now with Chugach. And I think that we can get to that in Alaska and have, 40% voter turnout of people paying attention and voting. So I'll stop there for now. Maybe Anthony, if you want to, bounce off some ideas as well, and Shaina and Jim too. But
sure, just one thing, just kind of teeing this up for our subsequent panelists is I'm a relatively new co-op member. I was an MLNP customer for a very long time. And I've now participated in all of 2 elections. But one of the issues that I've had, and I've talked to a lot of other people who are in the same boat, is there's an election. Okay, I need to get informed. It's very difficult to tell the difference between candidates who are running. Everybody wants low rates. Everybody likes renewable energy. Everybody wants safe, reliable, affordable power. Everybody really believes in Alaska. So I encourage you folks to tell us why we should vote for you. We have endorsed you, REPA's endorsed you, and we think you're great candidates, but I think it helps to explain why you're different than the other guy.
Can I jump in with a question first?
Please.
It's a trick question because I know the answer. I just looked it up. Do you know how many people have voted so far in this election?
I don't. I heard we're running ahead of previous elections somewhat.
I hope so. I just
2,000 people, something like that.
What was your guess?
2,000 people.
We're up to 6,700 as of Monday. So I think that's good. Out of what, 90,000 plus members. So in regards to Aurora's pitch that we can be more like Hawaii and get to 40%, we got a ways to go. But yeah, I hope this is this season of this election season and all of the activity is kind of a catalyzer for getting people engaged.
Anthony,
Yes.
you made a point the other day that we get the board that we deserve. So
Yeah.
basically, based on how we engage as members dictates the decision of our energy future and the decisions that the board is making and who is on the board. And so I hope everyone on this call can tell everybody that they know to vote.
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredibly important election. And also, I think I see, for example, Mark Wigan is, on the call as an audience member, and thank you for coming. Mark, I'm sure, could attest to the fact that, that the Chugach board has both monthly board meetings of directors as a whole, but then there are a number of other committees. I've started attending those sporadically, and attendance is pretty sparse. If attendance is pretty sparse, the board isn't going to hear from us. So I think part of participating is not only voting, but also trying to get informed and showing up at various committee meetings and having a say. I think it's helpful.
So Donovan, should I go ahead according to our agenda?
Yeah, and I think, thank you, Jim. And I think they sort of queued it up nicely. Not only did Anthony ask why you're running, but I think member engagement is one of the things that you're running on. So if you're comfortable, please go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, it is. Well, for certain. And that'd be great to get to the 40% that Kauai is doing. But anyway, my name is Jim Nordlund, and I am running for the Chugach board this year. And I was asked to give a little bit of background to tell you some of my bona fides. And I'm going to try to run through this real quickly. But I became interested in energy issues, I think, when I was in graduate school. at the University of California. I mean, the University of Colorado in Boulder. I was a student there starting in about 1980. And at that time, oil shale development was looking like a real probable thing on the western slope of Colorado, because we were going through, one of the gas crises at that point. OPEC related price hikes, and so oil shale development is a really intrusive, dirty kind of way of developing oil. So I was in the degree program, Master of Public Administration degree program in Colorado, and I helped start an environmental course of study with them. And I did an internship at what was then called the Solar Energy Research Institute, which is now NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden. I did an internship there and learned a lot about energy related issues there. Of course, NREL now has gone on to become a really, a prodigious institution for studying renewable energy. I got my degree in '82 and came to Alaska. First thing I did is I worked as a carpenter, because that's what I do. I wanted to get work more in my field, but I couldn't find a job. So the first thing I did is work as a carpenter, which I've done throughout my life. I joined in '84, I joined the Alaskan Center for the Environment Board and became the founding president of the Anchorage Waterways Council. So I was doing some, some environmental related work there. In '86, I became a legislative aide and I worked as a legislative aide for Johnny Ellis for 6 years. And then in '92, I ran for the legislature, won, and I served in the legislature for a term, lost my election in '94. In '95, Governor Knowles appointed me to become the Director of Public Assistance for the state. I did that job for 8 years. And when I quit that job a little bit early to manage Fran Ulmer's campaign for governor. She lost, of course, and my wife and child and I took off for a year and a half and traveled around the world. I came back and went back doing construction work, and I was doing a project for a friend of mine, Joelle Hall, at her home out in Eagle River. And Joelle was telling me about what was going on at the Chugach board at that time. There was really a very anti-union effort going on to try to bounce the IBW out of Chugach Electric. And I had been a former union person myself in both the Carpenters Union and the Laborers Union. So I got, Joelle kind of inspired me to run for the board in 2006. And Joelle, of course, has gone on now to become the head of the AFL-CIO. First woman in that role, and very proud of her. I think we all are. So I was elected to the Chugach board in 2006. And I won 3 successive terms. So I served 9 consecutive years on the Chugach board. We were able to stabilize the board, I would say. Got very good people on the board. We did the fire. When I was the president of the board of Chugach, we pushed through the power purchase agreement for the Fire Island Wind project with SERI. And then I got a new job. I was appointed to become the director of USDA Rural Development, appointed by President Obama. And part of USDA Rural Development is the REA, was what used to be called, as Anthony was saying, the Rural Electrification Administration, which is now called RUS, the Rural Utility Service. And so very familiar with the origins of cooperatives, as Anthony said. And in fact, that I worked for an organization that was a primary funder for those cooperatives. In 2011, I joined the REAP board. I have been on the REAP board ever since, and served as president for a term, and I'm back as president of the REAP board right now. So that is my background, why I'm running at this particular time. I'd done my time on the board for 9 years, and I enjoyed it. It's an Chugach is a very well-run organization. I'm very proud to be a Chugach member. It is a very complex organization. It's a $2 billion organization. It has very, challenging, I would say, issues associated with the electrification that requires skilled electrical engineers, et cetera, that work on the staff there. And also financing is very complicated. As Anthony said, to stand up these generation units and build transmission is incredibly capital intensive. And so the way you do that is you finance it with, most of our financing in Chugach is done with bonding through Wall Street banks. But that has to be paid back. The idea there, of course, is that you're building infrastructure for the future. And so as you're paying off bonds, future customers are helping to pay back that investment. I decided to run again this time because we're in a unique moment right now. As everybody's, I think, pretty well aware, we are running out of inexpensive gas, relatively inexpensive gas in Cook Inlet. To develop, there is more gas. There's a lot of gas in Cook Inlet, but it's going to be very costly to develop it. So costly to develop that it really does pay to import liquid natural gas as opposed to opening up more fields in Cook Inlet. And we all know that we're not likely to import gas from the North Slope. We've been working on ideas about a pipeline for years. That is not in the near future, if at all. And so what have we done in the meantime at Chugach really to get off of natural gas? Well, there's been some things done. I agree. And I think the board has, been doing a fairly good job of that. But in my view, it's simply not been enough. At the same time, since Fire Island went online 10 years ago, the cost of renewables has come down dramatically. Wind and solar, batteries are much less expensive now than they used to be. And I think we need to aggressively pursue renewables as an alternate form of fuel for generation. It's not to say that we're going to get off of natural gas entirely. It's not reasonable. We're going to need natural gas at least as a transition fuel, and as to help with the needed baseload generation that's necessary when you have intermittent sources of power like solar and wind. But to the extent that we can minimize the use of natural gas, we lower the cost of the fuel and it lowers our bills. Right now, I think it's fair to say that the cost of renewable fuel, including the infrastructure it takes to build those renewable sources of power, is cheaper than natural gas. And it's definitely going to be cheaper than imported liquid natural gas. And so I feel very strongly about this. That's why I decided to run. Also, at the same time, due to the passage of the infrastructure bills in Congress, we have 10 years of incredibly great funding from Congress, like nothing like this in a lifetime. For the electrical co-ops in the country, of which we are one of them, $100 billion is being made available in grants to those cooperatives to do grid to build grid resiliency and to introduce renewables onto their grids. There's also tax credits available to independent power producers. Those are companies, of course, that do pay taxes, and a 30% tax credit that they get would be passed on to the ratepayers. So again, once in a lifetime opportunity. As you know, the Biden administration is very, very pro renewable,
Cliffhanger, dang. Well, hopefully, hopefully Jim hops back on, but Shaina, as his fearless running mate, maybe you could drop in and offer your background and why you're running as a slate with one of the other candidates who's unfortunately unable to join as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us. This is a really great turnout, and I'm just excited to see that there's a lot of interest in this election. Like I said, I hope that, you know, this kind of urgent scenario that we're in actually does engage people, not just this year, but for the long term. So a little bit about myself. My name is Shaina. Let's see, where do I want to start? I will say that I'm a veteran. I spent a year in Iraq. That's how I came to start working on energy issues. When I came back, one thing that I pulled from that unexpected experience was that we will have future conflict over our limited resources. And so from then on, I started to focus my education and career on energy independence, something that I could focus on that would increase our resiliency and reduce our dependence on outside countries and events beyond our control. So since then, I've been really fortunate to work in the energy industry for the past 14 years. I actually was at this great organization called REAP for about 7 years, where I worked a lot on energy efficiency, policy and programs, renewable energy. I got to work all over the state, including working in Southeast with the Sustainable Southeast Partnership. So I have had a good perspective of working in rural and urban Alaska. And then for the past 4 years, I've been at the municipality as the energy and sustainability manager, where we did a lot of great things like bring in electric vehicles, solar power. You might not know it, but there's 50 kilowatts of solar out at the landfill working for you today. And we created the climate action plan with a ton of involvement from residents. And I often think about that experience and how excited people were to be working on a climate action plan, and then compare it to this experience of running for the board. And it's interesting because there's just not the enthusiasm for, picking your board members of your co-op utility. And so I think that speaks to, the work we need to do to make sure people understand what it means to be a part of a co-op and what it means to be engaged in what's going on with your energy generation and your local resources. We have found ourselves in a situation where in a few short years, we're probably going to be importing expensive and volatile liquid natural gas. We do need natural gas. Jim, Susanne, and I are running on a clean energy slate. We're not saying that we're going to get to 100% renewable energy in the near future. We're going to need gas, especially as a way to stabilize those variable renewable resources. We have a very reasonable outlook. And I get frustrated when I hear people talk about the cost of renewables with the assumption that it's more expensive than gas. Matanuska Electric Association just signed an agreement for 7.5 megawatts of solar that costs less than gas today. And so if we even consider that in the near future, we're going to be importing more expensive gas, the renewables are already beating that. And the fact that we're not considering those future prices, and only looking at current prices is it's very short-sighted. And so we want to change the way that we look at that. Importing liquid natural gas or LNG, that means we're exporting money. It means we're exporting jobs. We're not investing locally, and we're becoming less competitive. So yes, all of the candidates are for renewable energy because it makes sense. Our slate, myself, Jim, and Susanne Fleek-Green, we want to make that happen faster. So we've known that we've been running low on gas since, 2009. The state has been putting out reports that have been remarkably accurate. So we should have been working to integrate more, and I think we can do more. So the current board is working on a wind and a solar project, and that's really great. We want to see what's next. I'm ready to start the next RFP. How can we start bringing on more projects? Because Jim just started to talk about the Biden administration. Well, the IRA has put out, and the IIJA have put out hundreds of billions of dollars for clean energy integration. So we have great opportunity here. It's once a generation opportunity, and it's for about 10 years. So if we don't start now planning these projects, they're not going to be online by the time that money runs out. And so we just hope that people do get engaged. One thing Suzanne, Jim, and I also want to do is be better at, and I know this is a lot because board members already do a lot, but trying to meet people where they're at, and whether that is on the radio, in the paper, community council meetings, we want you to be engaged and be able to speak to your board members. And sometimes that can be intimidating and it can be hard to go to the meetings. And so we'll look for ways to better engage and hope to bridge that gap. I think I should stop there. I'll take it back to you, Donovan, or let Jim wrap up.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay? I'm sorry about that interruption. I'm in Cordova working on a project and I forgot my computer. And so I'm having to speak from my cell phone, and I got a call on my cell phone, and it blew it up. Anyway, so I was pretty much done with what I was going to say. It's just it's a key time, and the fact that there are actually 3 board seats open now, two of which are incumbents running again, and the other was because Erin Whitney had to resign from the board because she took a job with the U.S. Department of Energy. Anyway, it's a pivotal time for this particular cooperative, and I did want to say too, just in response to the ways of engaging, maybe you touched on this, Shaina, but ways of engaging, our membership more. There are a lot of members who have a lot of experience. Like everybody on this call, I believe, is a member, including Anthony, that could be useful to help Chugach plan its future. And I think we should be reaching out to those members in certain ways. And we're looking, for appropriate mechanisms to really engage our member cooperative owners into helping solve these problems. It's not to say that we would discount the skills of the current staff that work at Chugach, the skilled engineers and finance people, and they're really good people. They work hard. They do a great job. As I said earlier, Chugach is a great organization. I'm proud to be a member. I'm proud to have served on the board. But I think that like any democracy, which is what Chugach is, we should be reaching out to our voters. We should be reaching out to our members to get their advice. And the person who's really hot on this notion is Susanne Fleek-Green, our running mate. She's unfortunately can't be on this call, but she's really, really committed to that. So I'm looking forward. If we win, I'm looking forward to doing that. Nice to get to a little bit better turnout than the traditional 10 to 15% of the members that we've had in the past. And I'll say that a lot of people don't know they're even members of a co-op, because let's face it, you want electricity, you got to be a member, right? And so when you sign up, become a member, it's $5, right, to be a member of Chugach. I think that was the rate, that was the cost. You don't realize that you're a member. So I think when people realize that, I think a lot of people get encouraged, say, wow, I get a chance to have my say in how my power is produced. And I think that's really cool. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Jim. And I think I just wanted to maybe pitch it to Aurora for one important topic, and it's related to this member engagement, but I know Aurora really wanted to hit on the transparency issue too, which I think is another sort of important issue at stake here in this election. So Aurora, if you wanted to sort of touch on that topic too.
Yeah, and others, please feel free to jump in. Yeah, I think this is something that was anecdotally noticed by a lot of folks, the small number of folks that were participating in board meetings as members, that the board was often going into private executive sessions to discuss some things that really should be open to members. And there are reasons that a board would want to go into executive session. That's absolutely true, especially if it's around personnel matters or finances that could compromise their operations. But certain things particularly around the renewable portfolio standard legislation were being discussed in executive session. And this impacts all of us and impacts members. And then some further follow-up by the Alaska Energy Transparency Project. And I think Brian's on the call who operates that website. They showed that about 60% of the meetings had been held in executive session. And you can argue, definitely a certain percentage of that is warranted, but that's a lot of time to be having meetings that are private for a public member-owned utility. And this is, I want to point out that this is actually not unique for Chugach. We actually see this nationally when we look at sort of trends nationally across rural cooperative boards. And especially as member engagement is low, you see the use of executive session happening more. And there you could have different reasons for why this happens, but what we do know is that when members engage and ask for information and want to be in conversation, that then we see this transparency increase because members are asking for it. And so we really want to try to see that with the Chugach board, and is something that we want to address. And yeah, I guess one other note too is that democracy is messy. And so this is true for energy democracy, right? When you have more people involved, you have more different opinions involved. And that's actually what we want. Like, we want to have these conversations, these challenging conversations. We need to make challenging decisions, and we need everybody at the table. But this means that you're going to start having like differences of opinion. You're going to start having arguments. But I think, we can do this in a way, and this is sort of, the grand project of democracy, is to do this in a way that then the best solutions rise to the top, and we get to implement that, and everybody benefits as a result. So we're definitely in like challenging times, but I'm really actually excited for how much discourse is happening, and how many people are coming to the table and sharing ideas and learning and talking to each other. So yeah, thanks for all of you for being here and participating in that aspect too.
So thanks, Aurora. I have a question. Like Shaina, I happen to know the answer because I was recently researching this yesterday. But of their proportion of energy which is meeting today's load in Chugach service territory, how much of that energy is generated from renewable resources that have been added since Fire Island Wind went in? In other words, in the last 10 years, what new renewables have we brought on that are contributing to our energy mix?
So I know the answer. Should I give the answer?
Sure.
Is there a prize?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
there was one.
that's right.
Yeah.
It's less than one. It's less than 1%.
Yeah, and I forget the name of the watershed. They brought more water into Bradley Lake that added to the amount of hydro. And I forget what's the name. What's the name?
Battle Creek.
Battle Creek
Diversion Project, which was not particularly cheap power. That power came in at 10.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is considerably more expensive than solar. I'm not saying it's, the same value. It's really, hydro is great because it's dispatchable. But yeah, that's the only significant project. There've been, a little bit of rooftop solar, but that's it. That figure of less than 1% is also true for the rail belt as a whole. So the reason why this is disturbing to me is because for 14 years now, as Shaina mentioned, we've had consistent multiple reports from the State Department of Natural Resources telling a consistent story saying we're running out of cheap Cook Inlet gas. And everybody's known it. Chugach still, there's a errant web page on Chugach's website where you can see that they say as of 2010, we really need to increase our renewables dramatically to deal with these looming shortfalls. And basically nothing's been done. And now we're staring into the teeth of very expensive LNG imports. So Jim's really polite when he talks about, how, how Chugach has been managed. I think day to day, they do an excellent job. There's a number of things that have been done well. I was on the commission when, the acquisition of ML&P was brought forth. I think in the long run, that's probably going to be a good deal for everybody. But in terms of attending to this natural gas problem, really nothing has been done since 2012. And that's unfortunate because it's it's going to hurt.
So let me add that the juxtaposition of running out of natural gas in Cook Inlet and the viability of renewables can be, if you want to take the time, there are two really good reports that I think, Donovan, if we could get those reports, our URL to get access to the reports, if that could be shown to the listeners here, that'd be great. The one is the report from the State Division of Natural Resources on the future of gas in Cook Inlet. That report was first done in 2009, and there have been updates to that. Two updates to that report since 2009. We did know about this problem back in 2009. That's one report. And then the other report is the NREL report that shows how 5 different scenarios of how we can get to 80% renewables in the rail belt by 2040. They're thorough, they're really excellent reports. They're both about 40 pages long. And but if you really want to delve in and read those, you will see what we're talking about here. And we're not just making this up. We're not just a bunch of, as I always say, we're not just a bunch of hippies sitting around a kitchen table talking about, renewables. I mean, these are really good, qualified entities doing these reports, showing that what we're saying is possible. And it should be required reading from cover to cover for anybody who really wants to understand what we're talking about.
Thanks, Jim. I think so. One, I appreciate that the panelists have been answering questions through the Q&A feature. And so if you ask a question, perhaps it's been answered already via text, so please check those out. We do have a few outstanding ones, but I sort of want to bring it back to a final point about not only what can we do in terms of voting individually, and this maybe actually gels perfectly with a question that we had from someone else about, living off grid, but still wanting to have an impact. What can folks do outside of casting their individual vote to try and, have a say in these elections and ultimately in the decisions made by the utility boards?
I can jump off on that. And if we have chance, yeah, there are few Q&As that we could come back to, but I see that we are short on time. So yeah, we keep coming back to the importance of a co-op and how, it's very exciting that we have a co-op and we have a direct say in how our utility is run and what direction we go. So I think plea and urging to you today is to vote. We hope that you will vote for myself, Jim, and Suzanne, but please vote. Talk to your neighbors and your friends. We need to get more people voting and engaged, not just on the election, but regularly. So I think right now you have the opportunity to not just vote, but to talk to at least 10 people in your neighborhood, in your circle. And then we do have really great opportunities for volunteering if you want to do more. Organizations like the Alaska Center are making it really easy for you to call people, make sure that they know that there's an election and that they're eligible to vote. And here's how. And I think Aurora might have more details on that.
Yeah, so there's lots of opportunities to not just, for you to vote individually, but to help other people vote and make sure that other people get out the vote. So the Alaska Center has been hosting phone banking and door knocking. So phone banking is on Thursday evening. So there's a session tonight, and you can do that either at the Alaska Center offices in person, or you can even just do that from wherever you are. And they can get you set up with phone banking. And then there's also door knocking. So going around neighborhoods in Anchorage and talking to our neighbors, which is the foundation of energy democracy, about this election. And we also have, so I am part of a group called Chugach Ratepayers Alliance, and we are about to start a campaign called 3 Friends for Our Energy Future, where this is going to be run on social media, and if you can show us that you got 3 friends to vote, we will send you an art postcard. And we had local Alaskan artists make art about utilities and our energy future. And there's some fun facts about our utility and energy system on those postcards as well. And so stay tuned for that. If you aren't plugged into Chugach Ratepayers Alliance, we can share that information. But the goal of this is really to encourage people to get other people to vote. And this can also apply if you don't live in Chugach Electric territory, if you live in Southeast, or if you live in rural Alaska, but you have family and friends that live in Anchorage, talk to them about this, make sure that they're voting. And we will also send you an art postcard too. So we're really trying to incentivize this, especially in these last 2 weeks of voting, which usually has a drop off of people that are voting by this time. So we're trying to make a final push.
Yeah, and just to add to your last chance, the very last chance to vote is at the Chugach annual meeting on the 19th of May. If you didn't happen to have voted by then, and the electronic voting, I think, is shut down that day at about 3 p.m. If you have a mail-in ballot, and there are a few people that do, that has to be in by the 18th, the day before that. But the very last chance to vote is actually at the meeting, where you can go into a voting booth and vote, and they take a pause during the course of the meeting and add up those votes. That usually there's a couple hundred that night. And so there is one very last chance to vote, and that's at the Change Point Church. There's a beginning at 3 o'clock. There's a kind of a family kind of event outside the facility there, and then the meeting starts at 6. So that's the last chance to vote. One other thing I was going to say real quickly too, I saw in the chat a comment about tidal power, and I think it was really well said in terms of it was put in the context of, we don't know exactly how much water we're going to get in, behind these dams, given changing climate, etc. But with tidal, it's always there, and tidal power in Cook Inlet is the potential is awesome. And it's closer to prime time than you might think. ORPC is a company that's been working on this, and it's not, I would say that within, my lifetime, with not that much left of it maybe, but we probably will see tidal power in Cook Inlet. And the power that can be generated from successive tidal generating stations up and down Cook Inlet is awesome, and that would attract in manufacturing and other kinds of businesses into South Central Alaska with access to an almost unlimited amount of power. So that's really encouraging. But it's not going to solve a problem in the next 10 years for sure. So, but I certainly like the idea of tidal power.
And I'll add that if you vote, you are eligible to win a free year of electricity, which is pretty awesome. And they're like the Chugach Member Appreciation Day is actually pretty cool. I was there last year. They have bucket rides, they have food. There's vendors to tell you about their whatever it is. I was there last year with Solid Waste Services and our electric box truck. It was a pretty fun event.
I'll maybe also make one plug that there are other utilities on the rail belt, and today is the day for the annual meeting for Homer Electric. So just if you're here and you're a Homer Electric member owner, or perhaps know someone who is and they haven't yet voted, online voting is no longer an option, but you can attend the in-person annual meeting, which is at Soldotna High School. And that in-person voting begins at 4:30, and they'll tabulate those votes at 6. So spread the word. Might include that in our email to follow up. But I think that's also, we've got a few minutes left. And so before folks start dropping off, just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for joining us. We'll keep chatting for a second here, but I will be following up with an email that includes the recording of this, as well as links to a lot of the resources that we've mentioned here today. And so really just want to reiterate, this is an incredibly important election here in Chugach, as well as across the rail belt. It's the state's largest utility and really has an outsized impact on all the decisions, but specifically energy policy decisions being made here in our state. And so really hope that you might vote if you're a member owner and spread the word and share the resources that we're circulating. And also wanted to thank our awesome panelists and the 2 candidates here who are running for that board. And then just once again, reiterate that they're running as a slate of 3 candidates. The third cannot join us today, but her name is Susanne Fleek-Green. She's included on all of our endorsement materials. And so please make sure you vote and hopefully vote for these 3 candidates. So we've got a few minutes left. I know there was one question about, I think it was gravity storage, energy storage, and research into gravity batteries. And I think maybe also that's a cue to perhaps talk about Eklutna Hydro as well. And I know that that was a part of your answer to questionnaires, both Shaina and Jim. And so if you wanted to chat about that, but then also just sort of final remarks before we close the webinar today.
Shaina, do you want us to address the Eklutna situation?
Go ahead.
Well, yeah. Well, as you know, the first generating station of any size in the South Central, well, in the rail belt. Well, let me say it for Chugach at least, and MEA was the Eklutna generating station that takes water out of help me out. What lake is that again? The lake, the Eklutna generating station, where we get our water supply in Anchorage from. Anyway, is escaping my mind right now. But anyway, when they diverted the Eklutna River to make power for that station, it basically dewatered the Eklutna River, and so what used to be have all five species. Eklutna Lake, yes, thank you. Had all 5 species of salmon ran up that river, and particularly native people have been relying on that for years. And there's been an effort afoot to try to get more water back into that river. One intermediate dam has already been destroyed, and we're starting to see some more fish coming into the river, but they can't really make it all the way upstream because there's not enough water. I think we really need to think. I mean, I don't know a lot about this, but I think both Shaina and Susanne and I are all very sensitive to the fact that we would like to see more water go down that river to get salmon back up. And there were 40-pound king salmon that used to run up that river in the old days. At the same time, that would mean less water for generation, and so that's a compromise that would have to be made. However, if you could do pumped hydro, if you could pump some of that water that goes down through the generating station back up to Eklutna Lake, then you have you solve 2 problems. You get more water running down the river, and you have another source of storage, which is basically pumped hydro. So there's some really great ideas about that. In fact, Aurora's dad, Mitch, is really a big proponent of that. And I think it really deserves an interesting look. I mean, the fish issue aside, it's a wonderful place to look at doing pumped hydro, but we have to be very concerned also about doing it in a way that still allows for fish to migrate, for salmon to migrate all the way back up to Clutna Lake.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you answering the curveball there. There's a link in the chat that Aurora shared related to Clutna Hydro and pump storage as a potential solution here for Chugach. But again, wanted to thank the panelists and for the attendees. I'll be sharing resources afterwards, but appreciate you spending your lunch hour with us talking about this important topic.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Donovan. Thanks, everyone.